What do you feel about the development so far to settle fully on the government getting settled in? What are your immediate reactions?
So the BJP got 236 million votes and the Congress got 136 million votes, which incidentally is the best ever performance of the Congress historically.
Where did the BJP see those shortcomings, and more importantly, why?
There is literally no causation correlation that we know about. That's why ABC won or XYZ lost. It's kind of like, think tanks in India, which are a bit of a joke.
Muslims or the minorities that Western perspectives think the Modi government have been unfairly treating of, and I know many Indians disagree with that.
This is The Global Gambit.
2024, the year of elections, and none of them bigger, but also none of them bigger in human history than the Indian election. But bigger than that was possibly the upset that seems to be materializing in that the BJP-led coalition and Narendra Modi are not going to be winning the landslide victory that they expected. In fact, some forecasts estimate that they've only got 240 seats versus the Congress or opposition and the Indian coalition led by the Congress Party, which may have secured about 223, putting this at a much closer election than many, including Modi himself, expected. What does this mean for many different things, India? And what does this mean for many things, India, in the globe? Well, these things we're going to be reading into with Abhijit Iyer-Mitra, who is a pretty, I think, notable voice in the world of Indian affairs and South Asia, or the Indian subcontinent more broadly. He got his undergrad from the University of Madras, and he also holds a master's degree in international relations from the School of Political and Social Inquiry at Monash University, and is also pursuing his PhD. We've been planning this talk for a while, Abhijit. It's nice to finally have you on the Global Gambit. How are you?
Ditto, Piotr, and thanks for having me on. All good there?
Yeah, it's. I think I want basically to start off, and this is a part one. We'll have a deeper dive into foreign policy in the second half for people. So be sure to keep a lookout for that, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. But what do you feel about the development so far? I know we're yet to settle fully on the government getting settled in. But what are your immediate reactions?
So just to correct something you said, it's the BJP that ended up with 240, not the Alliance. The Alliance ended up with 296, and halfway in the House is 272. Whereas the entire coalition, the Indie coalition as it was called, ended up with 225 odd seats. So that was like, about 13 parties that allied up against and still got less votes than the single biggest party, the BJP. The difference in votes between the biggest of those, the Indian National Congress, and the BJP was 100 million votes. So the BJP got 236 million votes and the Congress got 136 million votes, which incidentally is the best ever performance of the Congress historically. And yet at the same time, it is the third worst performance of the Congress historically. Because, the way the first past the post system is, you just have to win a plurality to win seats, right? So with their best was in 1984. They won 120 million votes and 454 seats in parliament out of a 545 member parliament.
Wow.
And they've never actually, so Rahul has actually presided over the highest numerical vote count the Congress has ever gotten, and yet it remains the third lowest, he having preceded personally over the previous two lowest. So just putting that in context out there. But this one was particularly interesting because, a 0.8% drop in vote share, which is what the BJP got, resulted in a wipeout in 60 seats.
Wow.
And 60 seats is huge. It even lost the simple but absolute majority that it had in parliament by itself. So it's going to be much more susceptible to blackmail by coalition partners, which it wasn't. And the new thing here is that Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, has never run a coalition government where he did not have an absolute majority. He has been in power since 2001, when he became Chief Minister of Gujarat. And for the next 14 years, he remained Chief Minister of Gujarat till 2014, when he became Prime Minister. And every one of those terms, as Chief Minister of Gujarat or as Prime Minister of India, his party had an absolute majority. This is the first time he does not have an absolute majority. The test is going to be to see if he pulls off the kind of economic reforms he's famous for, economic, social, everything, and yet at the same time manage a coalition, which is notoriously difficult.
So I think one of the things I noted when we were having conversations with people on the channel in the run up to the election was the very, very strong assertion that this would be a wipeout, almost a bit sort of like Labour might do with the Tories and here in the UK. Many a political election to keep track of, but it hasn't played out like that. And where did the BJP see those shortcomings, and more importantly, why? I think there's a lot of questions that people who are very obviously staunchly supportive of the BJP and Modi's policies during his 2 terms previously are still scratching their heads to try and understand why. What's your take?
So, one of the things is the reason opinion polls go wrong, and India has some of the most shockingly shoddy election analysis on earth, is because there is literally no causation correlation that we know about. Almost every single book detailing elections in the past is basically, somebody won and here's my pet peeve. Let me extrapolate that on it and say that's why ABC won or XYZ lost. It's kind of like, think tanks in India, which are a bit of a joke because they don't actually they don't have any money for primary research. So it's all just events, and you pass that off as and commentary. There is no research on actual causation and correlation of victory or defeat, except maybe the 1977 election, which was a wipeout because of, everybody agrees, because of the excesses of the emergency, which is when the 2-year period when the constitution was suspended, and all the excesses, the forced sterilizations and the mass incarcerations that happened at that time. And 1984, when there was a sympathy wave because Indira Gandhi was shot dead. But other than that, there's lots of theories. Like, for example, in 2004, it was a bit of a shock defeat of the government, of the BJP government at that time. And everybody said it was because of this hubristic campaign called India Shining, which was, it was an ad campaign which showed everything was hunky-dory in India. Wrong again. It took us about 15-20 years to dissect that, and we found out that in the 99 election, before that 1999 election, the BJP still only had about 80 million votes, and the Congress even then had 100 million votes. So the Congress actually won the popular vote but lost the election. Whereas in 2004, that didn't change at all. The BJP's vote dropped by point something percent, and it dropped less than the Congress, which dropped by slightly point something greater percent.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the Congress won the election. It turned out it had everything to do with the seats where these wafer-thin majorities were, and the fact that the RSS, which is the ideological motherboard, if you want to call it that, of the RSS, didn't come out and campaign for them. It had nothing to do with the India Shining campaign at all. And yet, if you read any book on Indian history, the reputed authors, etc., what have you, validated as genuine intellectuals by international validation. I don't know how that works, but anyway, they'll tell you it was the India Shining campaign. Here again, people say it was because of autocratic government, democratic backsliding. This slogan that was given, "Ab ki baar 400 par," which means this time 400 plus. Last time as a coalition they got 353, and this time it was meant to be 400 plus. And again, the hubris. As we keep looking at it, I'm giving you a very rudimentary analysis right now because there is no cause-effect correlation thing that we can establish right now. It's going to take about at least 5, 10, 15 years to figure this one out. which is why pollsters get it wrong in India, consistently get it wrong in India. The first seems to be a large-scale abandonment of the government by several communities. In UP, for example, which is the single biggest state, 80 seats out of 545 is huge, right?
Yes.
There was an abandonment by two communities. One was the Thakurs, who are the same as the Rajputs, I guess. It's a belt from Rajasthan in the west through Madhya Pradesh, which is kind of south center, and UP, which is kind of northeast.
And if I can just jump in on that point, because I think this is quite an international podcast. So whilst you break down this for us, could you help some of us who are not as fully intricately aware of the details, because India's country, the demographic makeup is incredibly complex. I mean, we think sort of US is a bit complicated, or the UK is like it's so if you could do it just for us layman's here, I think that would be really helpful. But please continue.
Okay, so there was this upper caste community which kind of boycotted its traditional support for the BJP,
right?
Because they felt that they did not get what they wanted. And then there was this so-called lower caste community which abandoned en masse because they did not have representation. Now, it's very curious, because when you say they did not have representation, if you look at the list of ministers and members of parliament, they did have representation. The problem was those members of parliament and members of the local assembly in UP had no agency. Because both Modi and the chief minister in that state, Yogi, are very centralizing. They like to centralize power. They don't give the normal powers of an MP or a member of the legislative assembly to them. So they didn't feel empowered. And one of the concepts that the West might not get is that in India, a seat doesn't belong to a person, it belongs to a community. It's seen as a community seat. And we literally have hundreds of thousands of communities. So I don't know how to break that up for anyone in the West. It's not as simple as upper caste, lower caste, or anything like that.
No,
right?
I understand that.
I mean, I'm 46 and I keep learning new things about my country that make me feel like a complete idiot about what I said a month back. So imagine how it is. So this seems to be the main reason, number one. Number two, the opposition coalition was, if you add up their vote share, it's very, very substantial. And yet, in spite of all of that, of almost the entire previous opposition coming together, they still weren't able to cobble up enough votes to defeat the government, or the vote percentages to defeat the government. Because many of these parties are, in fact, remember, India is a pre-industrial society. We're not feudal, but we are pre-industrial. Because a lot of the reforms remove the feudalism out of it, but we do remain largely agricultural and feudal. And so, you still have a lot of, like all agricultural societies, which tend to be quite oppressive and hierarchical, there is this hierarchy. And many of these hierarchies, which are expressed through caste, are in fact in conflict with each other, the oppressor and the oppressed kind of thing. And many of these opposition parties actually represent diametrically opposite interests, which are literally oppressing one another. So that vote transference that should have happened did not. And yet there was enough of it to bring the government down by 60 seats. But they still, in coalition, the government still has an absolute majority. And the swearing in is set for the 8th of June.
So one of the things that I think is really beneficial is to understand this as comprehensively as possible, right? And I appreciate you doing that, in the sense of, we've got a Western set of perspectives here which don't understand the complexities of India, of the different communities. And there's a lot of, I think, simplification or sweeping generalizations, which doesn't help, including sort of one thing we've had on the channel and conversations previously is sort of many Indians feel frustrated with this sort of expectation that, about the Western approach to democracy, when in India it's slightly different, right? Or there's certain nuances there. How do you think that people who were so staunchly expecting Modi to win outright, not necessarily in a coalition sense, will be reflecting now. And what do you think that this means for Modi's policy making in the short to medium term, or say the rest of this year? I want to come after that to some of the coalition parties and entities that he'll have to probably work with. But I'm just curious for your thoughts on my previous question.
So 296 is a comfortable majority. There's only one party in this coalition that has about 14 seats,
Right.
which is kind of socialistic and opposed to market reforms in that sense. And that's the JDU from Bihar. Now, even if that party throws a tantrum, 296 minus 14 is still it's still 282, which is 10 seats over the absolute majority required to shove things through parliament. The good thing is this, lights a fire under Modi's proverbial ass, if you want to call it that, to actually start fast reforms, because he's realized with this election how close it came to disaster, and he's not going to take that chance anymore. He literally realizes he has to be like a shark. If he doesn't swim, he's going to sink. So he's going to shove through a lot of reforms. If he does not shove through a lot of reforms, he realizes his mojo is lost, and he's probably not going to get it back ever again, because nobody really votes for a status quo government that doesn't change anything at all, right? So he realizes that. What you're going to see is that the battle to get those reforms through parliament just became a lot tougher, because for many of those reforms, you require not just an absolute majority in the lower house of parliament, you also require an absolute majority in the upper house of parliament, which is like your House of Lords, which, sorry to say this, are all disconnected old farts who still go, fox hunting or what have you. I don't know what the Indian equivalent of fox hunting is in terms of an obsolete sport. But those kind of, Lord Hee-Haw type folks. And that's going to be very, very tough. So here you have a prime minister who needs reforms like never before to see to it he wins again in 2029. And on the other hand, that path just became a lot tougher. Right? But remember, the pace of reforms has to be slow as well. There has to be a calibration of it, because industrialization is one of the most socially disruptive processes on earth. And if done wrong, I mean, imagine taking away land from an agricultural person saying, I'm taking away your land, but I'm going to give all 5 members of your family a job. In an agricultural society, land and gold are surety mentally. Because for the longest time, we had a very flexible currency. And currency, bank accounts, these are not things that an agricultural mind is used to. Maybe it's changed because of, digital payments and things. Because today, every Indian, when you come to India and say cash, you're actually talking about paying everybody through your phone, right? Cash is phone. It is digital payment, which is why even the poorest vendor on the streets in a cart, who probably earns less than £1 a day, will also have a mobile phone with his own bank account where you can make a direct payment to. Maybe it's changed, maybe it's not. I don't know what the story there is. But it's a big letdown for several people within the party. Amit Shah, who's the number 2, the de facto deputy prime minister, if you want to call him that, he's not official designation at any rate, he's the home minister. He's going to have it very tough, because he was in charge of election management, and it has failed spectacularly. So there are going to be consequences for him. That said, it's very important Indian Twitter is as unreliable as Indian newspapers are, because everybody is kind of flogging their pet theory now. Why is Piotr wearing a black suit as we speak, a black jacket as we speak? It's because if my pet theory is Piotr has a black fetish, I will write a newspaper article saying Piotr's black fetish, that's why he wore a black jacket. If somebody else says oh, this is racism. He's trying to cover up his whiteness with a black coat. Then I'll tweet about it. You see, this is how everybody's pet theory gets tagged on, and everybody is literally blaming everybody else. It's going to take about 14, 15 days for the party introspection to happen. And then we'll probably get a much clearer image of where the power structures within the party have changed. That said, there are knives coming out for the prime minister within the party. It seems one Western strongman and one Eastern strongman are readying some kind of a leadership challenge. The issue for them will be that Modi is a national commodity. Even though he comes from the West, he is beloved in the North, he's beloved in the South, he's beloved in the East. These two have no visibility beyond their home states, beyond a certain level. So are they even going to be able to convince the party that they should take over? I doubt that very much.
Well, I find that incredibly surprising to hear that he might be facing, however futile, a potential leadership challenge. I mean, I follow Indian politics domestically as obviously a tad little less than foreign policy. But, even I am still aware of just the unprecedented popularity that Modi has. But I wanted to ask you a little bit more just on this point, and then we'll come to the coalition partners on economic reform, on reform policy or policy reform, because, in many ways, Modi has, shall we say, aggregately made remarkable improvements in India. I think S&P Global have called it the shining star, the shining star of the global economy, quote. It overtook the UK. It's going to overtake Japan and Germany, in the next few years, probably by the end of this decade. And obviously, we're talking about the space landing last year. The stock market is now the world's fourth largest. Some remarkable achievements. But at the same time, things like FDI, foreign direct investment, has been on a consistent decline. There are concerns around the consumer goods market, and private consumption growth is at the slowest, I think, in 2 decades, obviously setting aside the pandemic. So what do you think Modi's priorities are going to be in his third term? Is he going to focus on sort of specifics, or is he still going to try to grow the economy as a whole and hope that sort of, trickle down effect and lifting more of the Indian population up with the sort of overall economic progress?
Right. So, one thing is that because we're a largely pre-industrial state, a lot of the access to power, this notion that industrialization will produce jobs, which will give you stability of income as opposed to agrarian income, which thrives or fails depending on the monsoon and sunshine and hail and wind and etc., etc., etc. That hasn't sunk into the population yet.
Right.
So when we're saying trickle down's a very dangerous concept in India. You have to show people immediate results all the time. One of the reasons was the immediate results he showed in the first term, which was the electrification of every single house in India, plumbing and toilets built in every single house in India, health insurance for every single person in India, which was incredible. For the first time, everybody got it. And people didn't have to go around begging for money for treatment and things like that. All of that happened. The problem was, what new things happened in the second term? And the answer to that is nothing, right? There was nothing new that was done. So when he goes in now, he has to go in very specifically for industrialization. Because like you pointed out, FDI is not coming in. There are no factories being set up. It is jobless growth that is happening, largely inflation driven, which drives the indicators of growth. But there's no new factories that have come up. There are no new manufacturing that's come up. Literally none of that happening. And certainly nothing that requires more employment. So employment is a major, major problem out here. Now, how do you sort this out? Well, you reduce all this massive regulatory burdens. I was in Bangkok till day before, and I went to the highest rated highest Michelin star rated restaurant, Indian restaurant, is a 2-star restaurant, not in India, surprise, surprise, but in Bangkok, called Ga. And I went there, and the chef out there, Garima Arora, she's the one, she used to work at Noma in Copenhagen. She was telling me, it took her all of 4 days to set up that restaurant. In India, setting up a restaurant like that, it takes you 6 months to a year because of all the regulatory compliances and all the rent seeking that happens, all the bribes that have to be paid and everything like that. First, that needs to go. Second, land acquisition is a huge problem because the government designates land as residential, industrial, farming, whatever. And in order to get the land use change, you have to bribe another few bureaucrats for getting it changed.
Right.
That doesn't help either. Electricity supply, not assured. Local law enforcement support, not assured, because we never had police reforms in this country. So there's a lot of issues that need to get sorted out. So he needs to go in, and I think he realizes this very well. All the news reports we're seeing today seem to suggest that he's going in for rapid industrialization. The question is, how do you acquire land for that industrialization? Because if you have to take away land from farmers, you don't want this ending up like another farmers' protest like the last one did. You don't want to come up against the Supreme Court and all its, the rule of law in India is a joke. You can get diametrically opposite judgments from the same court, depending on, if the person in charge of the judgment had a good day or not, if his wife yelled at him or not, if his, whatever. I don't want to get thrown in jail for contempt. And this is how it works in India, by the way. And he has to balance all of this. So how do you industrialize without the kind of land and labor reforms? Labor laws in India are a joke. There is actual incentive for the micro to remain micro and never go too small, for the small to remain small and never become medium, and for the medium to remain medium and never become large, because the regulatory compliances from micro to small expand so geometrically that it's just not worth the expansion, right? And that's where a lot of the hiding of workforce and payment of workforce exists. 97% of the workforce in India is irregular and off the books. Only 3% of the workforce in India is regular, on the books, organized, whatever. And the laws to protect that 3% are so completely onerous that they destroy any chance for organized employment for the remaining 97%.
Wow.
And this is proven impossible. I mean, these are things that are extremely nuanced. Heck, even the Western press doesn't pick it up. There's a reason I just keep slamming Guardian, New York Times, Washington Post, all of them. They come here for 3 years. I've spent 46 years in India. I still don't understand my country. How the hell do you expect somebody coming for 3 years who doesn't? And I speak about 7 different Indian languages. These guys only speak English or French or German or whatever. They come in on 3 or 4 year postings. And apparently they're credible reporting on India. Yeah, boo, heck no. Not in my lifetime. That's not credible reporting. How do you explain this to ordinary people? Because, remember, the caliber of education in this country is extremely low. Difficult concepts are very, very difficult to convey in simple language to them. I don't know how he's going to overcome it. He probably should have done a lot of it while he had a brute force majority. Now he doesn't, and the going's tough, but the imperatives for doing it are much greater.
So I think you make a good point, and I think a lot of what you'll be saying is resonating with many people, and that's the goal of our podcast. It's the goal of the show, is to bring this sort of, well, the aim of the podcast is to sort of, reflect on the quote unquote West's place in the world, because it's not what it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and we're trying to find a way that is more constructive for everybody in the globe, not just the West. And I think that that's a fair point about certain media outlets which try to convey a very sort of simplistic picture or particular framing when they have, a fraction of the knowledge of you, and you're very, humble admission that you still don't really have a full understanding of how it works. But yeah, I think that unemployment was the other thing I was going to touch upon. It's pretty endemic from what I understand, and I think that unemployment amongst the youth has almost doubled over a fair few years. I think a third of graduates are even unemployed. I know from my own experience in Ukraine, which I have quite a lot of experience there, that you've got young Indians who are trying to find job opportunities. I remember in the first few months of the war that one of the biggest demographics that was affected in terms of visiting the country and they're having to flee were Indian students and youngsters who were there working in different capacities. So there is this concern, I think, about it from various sides. But I welcome any comments you have on that. But pivoting to the long-standing point I wanted to raise, which is the coalition partners, could you break down for us, the people who aren't necessarily as up to speed with the various potential allies that the BJP will fall back on, and whether or not there could be potential infighting, some resistance, or whether you think it's going to be relatively, easy sailing for Modi to get through most of what he wants to?
Yeah. So unemployment just has way too many facets out here, right? 97% of Indian engineers, for example, and engineering is a solid degree. It isn't, humanities where your feelings count, etc., these days. 97% of Indian engineers could not problem solve. That keeps changing from 97 to 95, and it's heralded as a success. It isn't. You have a new education policy that wants problem solving when your teachers can't even problem solve. Most teachers don't even know the basic syllabus, leave alone teaching you problem solving, which is an advanced skill. Problem solving is a quality skill to be taught to a kid. It doesn't work in a quantity environment where you can't even provide basic, factory floor worker education to the kid. And yet every mother whose child completes a bachelor's in engineering or a bachelor's in computer degree thinks that her son or daughter is the next Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, and the world is conspiring to keep her brilliant son or daughter away from the natural manifest destiny that this child should have had. What do you do in circumstances like that? You have hidden unemployment, which is mostly government employment where most people do not work. The work ethic here is extremely low. When I was working in hotels as a student in Australia, I realized this. We used to get people over from all over the Asia Pacific to work in the hotel. If the restaurant was at a lower floor than the lobby, and sometimes there would be food and beverage service in the lobby as well. And if you got the Chinese or the Thai or the Singaporeans over, you asked them to pick up whatever was left over. They would pick that up, they would clean the table, everything, and they'd give everything a quick wipe down and arrange the cushions and everything, even though that was an F&B's job. They would do it. The Indians would do exactly what they were told to do and not one little bit more. Right? Huge work ethic problem out here. So there's so many, and I could take a whole podcast just discovering the different layers of unemployment in India, the different shades of there is no one unemployment in India.
Well, there you go. We've got another episode for you to come back on to talk about in the future. Sorry, go ahead. That's such a good point.
It's such a multi-dimensional problem that when I hear a newspaper in the West or a commentator in the West say unemployment was a problem, I don't understand that, because it's so multidimensional. About 60% of the unemployment problems have been carrying over for the last 40, 50 years. So what changed in this particular election for this particular government? No. Right. So that's a different thing. But to come to coalition partners, which I think was the second part of your question, it's a very comprehensive, more or less ideologically similar coalition in terms of their view of economics. You look at all the partners, they are pro-business. They have no ideological issues towards labor reforms, land reforms, etc., etc. In fact, one of the southern members of this coalition the Telugu Desam Party, TDP, of Chandrababu Naidu, who was the Chief Minister of Hyderabad, is extremely pro-industrialization and things like that. That shouldn't be a problem. Like I said, there's only one partner out here, Nitish Kumar from Bihar, who may be a problem, but his numbers are not low enough. See, no, the great thing is there is no coalition partner of the BJP right now with numbers big enough to reduce an absolute majority by themselves.
Right.
The 2-3 parties have to come together in order for that to happen. So that is fundamentally a stable and, well, relatively manageable coalition.
Okay. What about, though, the opposition? In our penultimate question, I believe at the time of recording, the India alliance is, was discussing its next steps. President Sonia Gandhi and Rahul and others were there. How much do you think that they can be an obstruction to some of Modi's intentions? Albeit, though, it sounds like they want to make some constructive reforms. I think the Congress-led alliance would look to try to emphasize the role of Muslims or the minorities that Western perspectives think the Modi government have been unfairly treating of, and I know many Indians disagree with that. What about the other side in this case?
The opposition is going to be very, very destructive. Let's be very clear about that. They were destructive even in the last term, and as far as they're concerned, those tactics have been rewarded. So there's actually an incentive now to be much, much more, not just destructive, but also disruptive, which is, I suspect, what they're going to do. Now, India is one of those countries where you can literally keep abusing the prime minister and not go to jail or anything happen to you. But there was this narrative that he's a horrible, horrible dictator, tyrant, whatever nonsense you heard. Well, for people like me, I re-emphasize my age. I'm 46. I feel very old. For me, the nostalgia of my childhood came back to me when I went to Pyongyang, of all places. I grew up in Delhi. And when I grew up in Delhi as an 8-year-old kid, I remember hardly 10, 15 cars on the road, seeing 10, 15 cars during the entire day, empty roads, huge wide boulevards and avenues. It used to be so quiet that the lions waking up at Delhi Zoo, which was about 7-8 kilometers away, was our wake-up alarm in the morning. That's how quiet it was. And electricity used to keep going for 5-6 hours a day. We used to get water for 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening. Anything you said against dear leader, at that time it was dear leaderess, would land you up in jail. You could be tortured without any consequences, etc., etc., etc. Things would be banned. There was just one channel. All our school plays used to be about dear leaderess and her father, and later on her son. Pyongyang was it. Everything was import substitution. Today, it's quite curious that none of this exists. You can actually go around saying the most horrible things about the prime minister, and nothing's going to happen to you, except the taxman might come knocking, in which case you have a duty to keep your books in order. Like they say, don't throw a stone. People in glass houses shouldn't be throwing stones. But anyway, apparently that's dictatorship. Fine. I mean, believe what they want to. Curiously, it is in this 5-year term that the incentives for Modi to crack down much, much more harshly increase exponentially, because if he does not, if he allows disruption to go ahead, he knows he's going to lose the next election. So there is now a systemic incentive for him to be extremely harsh with the opposition. And I think you're going to start seeing that very, very quickly.
I think that the Congress party even said along the lines of, well, to quote actually, they'll continue the fight against the fascist rule of the BJP led by Modi, unquote. So we're certainly going to have a tumultuous period between these two sides, and especially when Modi really begins to try and enact more of his mandate. But I think the last question I have for you, Abhijit, is what takeaways would you emphasize to, firstly, more of the Indian community that I know does like to watch the channel, but also more Western and internationally orientated audience? What should they be looking out for, and what kind of things would you encourage people to really think about?
The only thing I can encourage the West to think about is go beyond newspapers. I think people really need to come here and look at things much, much deeper on the ground instead of relying on their, echo chambers. But the same goes with the Indian diaspora as well. They tend to flog dead horses over and over again and play to stereotypes. I don't think, be it a friendly Western press or a hostile Western press, I have not seen the kind of nuanced coverage of India that in English period, not even by the Indian media, that a country like this deserves. Black and white simply doesn't suit India, where our religion is all about shades of grey. Our gods had great flaws, our villains had great good. So, it's India is a reflection of a religion. It's too many shades of grey. I don't think this black-white narrative, unnuanced narrative suits it.
I agree. And I think that the simplification of anything in geopolitics greatly frustrates me. But can you say that against?
Which is why I don't have a TV and I don't read newspapers, except, to ferret out information on actual facts, which Twitter is better for. And of course, the Indian media's coverage of the West is even worse. Because unlike, say, the West that actually has correspondents in India, Indian press can't afford to have full-time correspondents abroad. But I think it just keeps adding to the complete loss of credibility media suffered over the last 10, 15 years, where people would much rather go on quasi-primary sources like Twitter and see for themselves.
No, certainly there's a great simplification of geopolitics and Indian politics in Western media. It's one of the things that frustrates me most is this desire to try to simplify geopolitical matters when they're anything but. I mean, there's a reason why military affairs has the term the grey zone. But do you not think that that could be applied to the Indian media as well? Isn't all media somewhat misguided and simplified? Indeed, and hopefully that could be applied also to this YouTube channel and the conversation we've just had with you. But everybody, thank you very much for watching. It was a pleasure to have Abhijit on, and some of you have been highly requesting him. Glad to have finally made it happen. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to give it a like and subscribe. Click that notification bell so that you never miss upcoming episodes, including part 2. And I look forward to seeing you all in the next one. As always, have a peace of mind. Take care.